This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be demonstrating a new tool available under Simple GIS Client version 11.2, and it's a new plugin extension named Simple Territory Mapper. And so quite simply, this plugin extension extends the functionality of the Simple GIS Client application, allowing the user to create and manage territories and assign territories. And quite simply, a plugin extension, in case you're not familiar, for Simple GIS Client is simply a small program that gets installed that extends the functionality of your Simple GIS Client application. And one of the new features available under the version 11.2 release of Simple GIS Client is the new Plugin Manager dialog that allows you to view and manage all of the plugins or available plugins to Simple GIS, all from within the Simple GIS Client application. And so to access that, quite simply, so when you start your Simple GIS Client, of course, the first screen you're brought to is the New Project screen that allows you to create a new project file. In addition, if you needed to, to open an existing project, you can simply click on the Open Project menu here along the left-hand side, and it will bring you to the a file selection where you can navigate to a specific drive or folder and actually select a Simple GIS project file that you'd wish to open. So the project files show here on the right-hand side of the screen based upon the folder you've selected. And of course, at the bottom, you have a list of all your recently opened project files that you could also select to open. Now, from either the New Project or the Open Project menu, along this left-hand pane of your application window, you see several links here. And one of those is a plugins link. And if you click on this link, this will actually bring up the Simple GIS Client Plugins Manager. And so what this dialog does is list all available plugins available for Simple GIS. And as you select one of these plugins, on the right side of the dialog, you would see a brief description of the plugin. You would also see a status of whether the plugin is currently installed in your Simple GIS Client environment, and also an option to install the plugin. It would also give any pricing information here on this right-hand side as well. In addition, there's a link next to each plugin name that will bring you to the website to give you more information about that specific plugin. So as I scroll through the list, I can see the descriptions change, and of course any pricing information. And if I come to this last plugin in the list, the Simple Territory Mapper plugin, this is the one I'll be demonstrating today. And currently in my current environment, I see that I already have this plugin installed. And just real quickly, looking at the description, this plugin allows users to easily create and manage territories. In addition, you can easily append demographic data from the U.S. Census Bureau or any custom data you may have stored in external spreadsheets or tables, such as sales data, staffing, etc. This plugin does have a licensing cost of $25 per license. However, there is a free 30-day trial that comes along with the plugin. So if I needed to, I could simply click this Install Now button to download the installer and install the plugin in my Simple GIS Client. Of course, since I already have it installed, I have no need to do that. So I'm just going to close this manager for now by clicking this Close Plugin Manager. Now, as plugins are installed in your Simple GIS Client, what that means is anytime you create a new project or open an existing project, any menus related to the additional functionality of that plugin will automatically load into your Simple GIS project file. So for instance, I'm going to come here and I'm going to open an existing project that I've already created. It's actually based upon the OpenStreetMap wizard. So I have one created for the entire U.S. Where I downloaded the U.S. data set. And of course, as I open this project, I now see that I am currently zoomed to the U.S. Of course, Alaska's up here in the very upper left corner, with Hawaii down here in the lower left corner. Now, as I mentioned, since I've installed the Simple Territory Mapper plugin, any menus associated with that plugin for that additional functionality will automatically be loaded into your project. And so the Simple Territory Mapper, its menus are located underneath the Geoprocessing pull-down menu on your map document. So if I was to click on this menu, and if I scroll towards the bottom, I see a menu group called Simple Territory Mapping. And as I hover over that menu group, I see it expand, and here's all of the specific menus related to the Simple Territory Mapper plugin. And so this is where I would access all of the functionality associated with that plugin. In addition, if I look underneath the Help menu, and if I was to scroll towards the bottom, I would notice that I have a new menu also called Simple Territory Mapper Manual. And this is actually a menu that will open the user manual for the Simple Territory Mapper plugin. So if I was to click this menu option, it would then open the PDF document that is the user manual for this plugin. So from here, then I can access all of the documentation related to this plugin. So I'm going to close this for now. Now, the Simple Territory Mapper, it allows you to create and manage territories and assign those territories to specific individuals. And it operates, the very first step you have to do is create a base territory layer. And so what this layer is just a shapefile. And if you're not familiar, a shapefile is a standard GIS data format that stores geometry data and attribute data. But the base territory layer is a shapefile that stores the geography for all of the boundaries that defines your territory. And this plugin supports boundaries of either states, counties, school districts, or zip codes. So you can define your territory boundaries by any of those boundary types. And it also allows you to append additional data to those boundaries. Like I mentioned, if you have data from external tables like sales data or staffing data, or you can append demographic data from the U.S. Census Bureau. And so it appends that data to those boundaries, and then as you assign those territories, those geographies to specific individuals, it can aggregate that data so that you can see the cumulative sum of whatever those field values contain assigned to that person, whether it's sales data, staffing data, demographic data. And this may become clearer as I demonstrate this as we go forward. So to start with, I'm going to go underneath my geoprocessing menu, and I'm going to go to my Simple Territory Mapping, and I'm going to select this very first menu option that says Create Territory Base Layer. So again, this is the first step I need to do, is create my base layer. The base layer is going to be that's why it's called the base layer. It serves as the foundation or the base for all of my territory assignments related to that geography type. So as I click on that menu option, I get this new dialog that appears. That's the Territory Base Layer Generator. And if I was just to kind of follow in order here, I see the very first option that I need to fill in is select the file name for my new shapefile to hold base territory boundaries. So again, I'm creating a new shapefile, and so I need to specify a file name for this new shapefile that's going to hold this data. So to do that, I simply click on this button that has the open folder icon, and that brings up a file selection dialog box, and it's called Create New Territory Layer. So at this point, I can click on this drop down to select the particular area or folder where I want to create this new file. It's on the correct folder right now where I had selected. I created a folder called Territories. And now I just need to specify a file name for my new layer. So in this case, for this demonstration, I'm going to create and assign territories based upon state boundaries. So for my base layer, I'm simply going to call it State Boundaries. But you could call it whatever you would like. So I type in my file name and I click Save. And as I do, I see that this file name is now populated for my new shapefile. Next, I need to select the desired geography for my territory boundaries. Again, as I mentioned, the Simple GIS supports 4 different territory boundary types. We have state, county, by school district, or by zip code. So for this demonstration, again, I'm using state boundaries. So I select the state radio button. Next, as I mentioned, you can append data that you may have saved to external spreadsheets, CSV files, or tables. And so to do that, I need to populate this database and table setting here under this append data from table. So what this allows me to do is take any data that I have in these external tables and append it to my state features in this new base shapefile. So to specify my new table, I simply click on this button that has the yellow database symbol, kind of looks like a yellow drum with a magnifying glass on top of it. So I click on this button. I'll get a new dialog box asking me to specify the table source. If I was specifying a file-based table, like an Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file or a D-based table, I would use this Data Table tab, which is the first tab in the series. If I needed to connect to an ODBC compliant database, for instance, that had a table that I wanted to use, I would select this ADO table. And as I clicked on that tab, I would see my settings change a little bit. And I would actually click on this button that has the ellipses here at the bottom. That would allow me, as I click on that, to connect to an ODBC data source. Of course, it's giving me an error because I didn't select anything. As well as if I was connecting to a Simple GIS server table, I would click on this tab, specify the server name in the table that I'm connecting to. In this case, I'm just going to connect to an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to go to this Data Table tab, and I need to specify the file name. So I'm going to click on this button with the Open Folder icon. And as I do, once again, I get a file selection dialog box. If my files were located in a different folder, I would need to come to the top, click on this drop down and select or navigate to the folder that actually contains the file that I'm wanting to open. In this case, I am in the correct location. And the spreadsheet that contains the data I want to append is called State Sales. So I'm just going to double click on this file name. As I do, I see that it populates the file name in this edit box, and I simply click Apply. Now, with this being an Excel spreadsheet, I need to select the worksheet that contains the data that I'm wanting to append. Since an Excel file can contain multiple worksheets. So I simply click on the drop down, and in this case, my data is on the first sheet, sheet 1. As I click Apply, then it wants to confirm that the first row of data is actually my field names or column names, which in this case, that is correct, so I simply click Yes. Now, as I do that, if I notice here under this Configure Table Geography section, where I'm circling with my mouse, I have a list box called Available Table Fields. And this actually lists all of the fields or all of the columns in my Excel spreadsheet. And in this case, I have 2. I have one called Sales, which contains actual sales data for each state. And then I have a column called State that contains the state name for each row of data that sales data is for. So what I have to do, excuse me, in my configuration, I have to tell Simple GIS which column contains the information that's going to link each row of data to the features in my base territory boundary shapefile. So since my base territory boundary shapefile is based on state geography, I only need to give one column that has the either state name or state abbreviation that links each row of data to the features in this shapefile. So in my case, it's pretty easy. I have a column named State. So I select that field or column. And then if I notice here, I have some hints here in this little bubble area next to this configuration, and it just says, because I have selected status and geography type, I must specify which table column contains my state abbreviation or state name information. So I've selected state from the available fields, and now I'm going to simply click this button that has the double arrows pointing to the right next to the state field. And if I hover over it, it says click to add selected field. And so as I click this, I see that it moves this column into this configuration property. And so now this just is setting the relationship between the rows of data in this spreadsheet to my features and my shapefile. In addition, if I did want to append demographic data, if I look to the right-hand side of the dialog, I see a section that is asking me, do you wish to append demographic data to your territory boundaries? And this uses data from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year data set. There are some predefined queries that come when you install Simple GIS Client, and these are just already pre-configured and set up. So I have some dealing with education statistics, some with housing, some with income, and then some with population. And as I select one of these queries, I see the fields that this particular query will append to my shapefile. In this particular query that I selected, there's only a single field called total_POP for total population. And if I look at the description below, it gives me a description of this query. And this just simply calculates the total population in a given area. And so this will append the total population for each state to each feature in my shapefile. If I was to select a different query, I would see the fields would change, as well as the description describing what each field represents. In addition, if I wanted to, I could define my own query based upon that American Community Survey data set. By clicking on the Define New Query tab, I would select a category for the information I'm wanting to query. I would select a table that holds the data based upon the category I selected, and then I would select the fields that I would want to append. I'm not going to cover all of this information right now. You can consult the Simple GIS Client user documentation or user manual to see how you can define your own queries based upon the American Community Survey data set. It's covered in the user manual describing the U.S. Census Bureau data wizard that comes with Simple GIS Client. So for now, I'm just going to go back to my predefined demographic queries, and I'm just going to select the total population query. Now finally, I need to specify how I want to render my state features in my map. I can use a simple legend, which means use the same symbol for every state feature, or I could define a gradient, which would use a color gradient based upon some field value and however many number of classifications I want to base that gradient on. So for instance, if I select gradient as my legend type, I can now select the field that I want to base my gradient on. And if I click on this drop-down box, it'll give me all the fields containing numeric data. So in this case, I have the sales field, which is the data I'm appending from my external spreadsheet, which is the sales data. Or I could use total population, which is the data I'm appending on my demographic query to my feature. And I could always, after adding or creating this shapefile, I could always change this gradient to use the other field just by using the features available in Simple GIS Client natively that comes with the application. And I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But for now, I'm going to select sales to base my gradient on. And here I would specify the number of breaks or classifications I want to use for this gradient. So I'm just going to bump this up using the up arrow to 6. In addition, I could change the base symbol for my state features. Now, what this does, if I click on this, it brings up a palette that I can select a different symbol type. Because I've selected gradient, by default, the simple territory mapper, the gradient is always going to be based on red. It's going to use red as the foundation and use a gradient based on that. So if I was to come here and select blue, because I've selected gradient, it's not going to be blue. It's going to use a red color palette to base my gradient upon. But what it does allow me to do is if I wanted a different fill pattern, let's say if I didn't want a solid fill, if I wanted to use a hatch pattern, I could do that. But for now, I'm going to use this default symbol that comes with it. In addition, this default symbol is semi-transparent, so it will allow other features to show through the features on the state. So it is not 100% opaque. It is semi-transparent as well. So I'm going to just keep the default symbol. And now all I need to do is click the Generate Territories Base Layer button. This will start the process, and if I notice, I'll see the status at the bottom of my dialog here. So it is now finished processing. In the process of matching the records from my Excel spreadsheet to my state layers, there was one row in my Excel spreadsheet that it could not find a match for. And this is the data here. So I had a state abbreviation of KD. And of course, there's no state with that abbreviation, so it couldn't find a matching state for that record. So what I can do is, I know that this is simply a typo. This was supposed to be KS for Kansas. So I can simply change that value, and then I can click the Try Match button here at the bottom of my dialog box. And if it finds a match, it'll highlight it on the screen. Now, unfortunately, it highlights it in red, which kind of matches in with the gradient of the shapefile that we just created for the states. But I also notice this Accept Match button has now become enabled. So it found a match, and now it's prompting you, do you want to accept this? Is this correct? So if I click this Accept Match, it will go ahead and remove that record out of my mismatch table up here, and it actually appended that data to Kansas in my base territory shapefile. So I can now dismiss this dialog box, and I see that this is my shapefile that it created. Remember, we named it State Boundaries, and it has an SHP file extension. And again, this is the legend that it created based upon that gradient that we chose for sales data. We have specified 6 breaks, so I see that I have 6 classifications here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I see the range of values for the sales data in each of these classifications. Now, as I mentioned, you can use the basic Simple GIS client functionality to change your legend for this boundary as well. So, for instance, if I wanted to, so let's say I don't want to use sales data any longer to base my legend on, I want it to use the total population, I could simply double click on this layer, which brings up the Layer Properties dialog box. I would find my Legend tab and select it. And I see my legend type is proportional based upon the sales field. But if I was to simply click on this drop down and select total population, of course, none of these values are accurate any longer because I've chosen a different field that has different values. So what I'm going to do is in the lower right-hand corner of this grid, there's a button that says Auto Classify Ranges. I'm simply going to click on that. Again, I can choose the number of classifications I want. So if I want it 6 again, and I'm proportionally changing my symbols by the color value. And remember, I said by default it uses red as its foundation color for its gradient. But if I wanted to change this to blue, for instance, I could simply click on this color selection drop down and select blue. And when I click Apply, I see that it now reclassifies based upon this field value, total population. And it's using blue now for my color gradient. And if I click Apply, I now see my legend has indeed changed, and my state boundaries from this territory base layer is now rendered using this new gradient. So again, that is the base or the foundation layer for our territories. And again, I can also inspect the data for any of these states by making sure my state boundaries is the active layer, which is as indicated by this green shading. So as I click on layers, I see that my active layer changes based upon the layer I click on based upon this green shading. So again, I select state boundaries, and then I use this tool that says View Feature Data. And if I click this tool and click on a state, I would see that indeed I do have my sales data has been appended to my state feature. So for Colorado, I had 175,000 in sales, as well as the total population for that state, which is almost 5.5 million for Colorado. So now the next step is I need to actually create my territory assignments. So this is when I'm going to begin selecting states and assigning those states to individual people. And there's two ways I can do that. So if I go back to my geoprocessing menu, scroll to the bottom to my simple territory mapping menu, I have two options. I can either create a new territory assignment layer. So this will create a new brand new shapefile for my territory assignments that will be empty. So if I was starting from scratch and just needed a new empty shapefile to hold my territory assignments, this is where I would start. And as I click on this menu, the very first thing I need to do is select my base layer that my assignments are going to be based on. So what I'm going to do, what this allows me to do is select regions off of this base layer and assign those regions to individual people. And so this is all of the layers in my map, all of the polygon layers in my map. And so I would just need to select the one that defines my territory base layer, which is the state boundaries.shape. And then I would just need to specify the output or the file name for the shapefile I'm wanting to create to hold my territory assignments. So again, I would click this Open Folder button to bring up a file selection dialog box. I would navigate to the folder where I want to save the file and type in a new file name. Now the other option that I'm going to demonstrate here today is under geoprocessing. And if I go underneath the simple territory mapping, it's this option that says generate territory assignments from table. So what this allows me to do is I click on this, it brings up a new dialog box, and it allows me, much like I did when I created my base territory shapefile, it allows me to specify either an Excel spreadsheet, a CSV file, or an external database table that may already contain some assignments that I've already created and generate a new territory assignment shapefile using the data out of that table to create those preliminary assignments. So for instance, in this case, I have to first specify the input source. So again, I click on this button that has the yellow database with the magnifying glass over the top of it. It brings up this table source dialog box. And in this example, I'm using a spreadsheet once again. So I use the Data Table tab, and I click on this button with the open folder to bring up a file selection. And I'm going to select the spreadsheet that contains my preliminary state assignments. So I have a spreadsheet called State Assignments. I'm going to double click on it. As I do, it populates this file name, and as I click Apply, being an Excel spreadsheet, once again, it's going to ask which worksheet out of my spreadsheet contains the data that I'm wanting to use. And again, in this example, all of my data is on sheet 1. So I select it and click Apply. And once again, it's asking me to confirm if the first row of data contains the column names or field names. So I'm going to say yes, as it does. Next, I need to specify the output layer or the file name for the new territory assignment shapefile I'm wanting to create. So very similar to how we did it when we created our base territory layer. I'm going to click on this button with the open folder, navigate to the folder where I want to create my new shapefile, and then just simply type in a file name for my new shapefile. So I'm just going to call this one My State Assignments. And as I type this, I simply click Save, and now it creates or populates the file name for the new shapefile I'm wanting to create. Next, I select the territory base layer that this territory assignment shapefile is going to be based on. So each territory assignment shapefile has to be related to a corresponding territory base layer. So in this case, I'm selecting the state boundaries that we created earlier as my base layer. And as I select this layer, I notice that it automatically populates the fields out of that shapefile, and it automatically detected that this is a state boundary base layer, so it's based on state boundaries, and it selects the appropriate field that's the key for each state feature in this base layer. And if I look at my little help hint here, it says Simple GIS detected you are using state boundaries from your selected base layer. So select the fields containing state name or abbreviation from your territory assignment table. So in my spreadsheet, I had two columns in this particular spreadsheet that I'm generating this new shapefile from. I had a column called state, which was simply the state name, and then a column for manager, which told me for that state who is the manager assigned to that state. So my geography field is state. This is what relates each row in my spreadsheet to each boundary in my base territory layer. Next, I would need to select the territory assignment field, which is the manager. So this is who each state is assigned to. So I'm going to select that. Also notice I have another list box here that's disabled or grayed out. And that's because depending on the type of boundaries that your base layer is based on, sometimes it may require two fields to define a unique boundary feature. And a good example is county boundaries. Since county names are not unique across the U.S., you need to specify a field that contains the county name and then a field for the state. And so that's a good example where you might have two columns needed to uniquely identify a boundary feature. Next, once again, I need to specify the type of legend that I want to use for my new territory assignment shapefile. Again, I could use a simple legend, which simply uses the same symbol for every feature in my shapefile, or I could use a unique symbol by territory assignment. So by default, this is selected. And what this does is it'll assign a unique color for each unique manager in your assignments. And then again, I could change my base symbol. And this just allows me to change the field pattern. So for instance, by default, I have this default symbol here that's solid field, although it is semi-transparent. And so I could change this to a hatch pattern if I wanted to by simply coming and selecting a different symbol and clicking the OK button. But for now, I'm going to keep the default. And then I simply click this Generate Territories to begin the operation. As I do this, I see the status of the process here in the lower left corner of my dialog. So right now it's processed 12, 14 of 17 records. And it's been able to match 100% of the rows of data out of my spreadsheet to my base territory layer. As it continues to process, once it's done, it'll add the new shapefile and dismiss that dialog box to your map, which appears up here. So this is the new shapefile we created called My State Assignments. And in this case, I had two different managers. I had Eric and Will. And then I have this no data, which means this is if I had any features with no one assigned to it, it would show up in this particular color. It's a little hard to see on this map because, again, these are semi-transparent symbols. And because I have my gradient underneath it, it makes it a little harder to see. But I can turn off my state boundaries for now. And it'll make it a little clearer to see my territories now. So I see I have Eric here assigned in the southeast, and then I have Will in the northeast. And if I was to zoom into this area, I can see it a little bit clearer. So at this point in time, I can now try and manage these territories. So that by managing, I could either remove areas from a given manager or assign other areas to a manager. And I could also see the effect of that in terms of whatever the field value is that I'm trying to balance. And so what I mean by that, if I come back to my geoprocessing menu, to my simple territory mapping, and I'm going to come down to where I see Manage Territory Assignments. And if I click this menu option, I get a new dialog box that appears. And in this case, I have the very first option is Select Territory Layer. So in this list box, this would list every territory assignment layer that I have currently loaded, excuse me, in my current map. So in this case, I have just a single territory assignments layer that we created called My State Assignments. If I select this layer, I now see that I have another list box that's called Select Balancing Field, and it populates the fields that I could use to balance my territories by. So looking at this, if I was to select sales, for instance, I would now see in my territory balancing graph the two different managers that I have assigned, and based upon the sales field that I selected, this is the total sales assigned to Will, about 2.2 million, versus the total sales assigned to Eric, about 1.18 or just under 1.2 million. Also notice in my graph, I have it set currently, it's by default, it's set to territories in view. And so what that means is the bars that you're seeing in this graph are just the territories that are visible in my current map extent. So for instance, if I was to zoom in to where I only had a single territory visible in my current map extent, let me pan up a little bit because I think I still have some of Eric visible. I would see that now I only have this one manager visible on my territory balancing graph. So by using this selection here on this radio button, if you can see where my mouse is, territories in view, that means only display the territories that's currently visible in my current map extent. So now as I zoom out, I now see I have Will and Eric visible. I could also choose to only show the selected territory. So again, it would just be whatever features I selected on the map. So if I select this option, currently I have no territory selected, but if I use my Select Features tool here under Simple GIS Client and was to select, let me make my territory assignments the active layer, and then if I was to select Will's territory, then that's the one that would show in my graph. So I'm going to go back to territories in view, and then I'm also going to clear my selection on my territory assignments layer. So at this point in time, it's not just about viewing these values, but I can also manage these territories. So one of the things you can also do, if you will notice, if I zoom out, if I was to click on Will's bar here, I would see his territory flash on the map. So that shows me where his territory is. Same thing with Eric. If I click Eric, I see his territory flash. I can also start either removing or assigning areas to different managers. So if I select this button here that says Select Areas, and I click on North Carolina, for instance, I see that it now highlights the state. And if I wanted to remove this territory from Will, I would need to make sure I have Will selected from my select territory. So these are all of the managers that have territory assignments in my current territory assignment layer. So I would select Will, because then I could either add to or remove from. So whatever button I click here, this action is applied to whatever person is selected underneath this select territory list box. So I need to make sure I have the right person selected, which I do in this case, Will. And now if I select remove from selected territory and give it a second for it to process, it's actually going to remove North Carolina from Will's territory, which, as I see on the map, it did clear it out. And also notice here on his territory balancing graph, his total sales value did decrease down to just over $2 million. Likewise, if I was to come and click the Select Areas tool once again and select North Carolina, and I need to make sure I have Eric selected in this list box, so I can either click on his name here. Also notice if I click on his bar here in the graph, it automatically selects him from the Select Territory list box. But now that I have him selected, I could click Add to Selected Territory. And it's going to take whatever region I selected, in this case North Carolina, and it just assigned it to Eric, as I can see on my map. And I also see that his sales value now increased to $1.364 million. Now, I don't have to remove from an existing person and then add to another person if I want to reassign a territory. I could do it in a single action by simply selecting the area. So I click on the select areas. In this case, I'm going to select Virginia. And again, make sure I have the person selected that I'm wanting to do this operation for. So I'm wanting to take Virginia, which is currently assigned to Will, and I'm going to assign it to Eric. So I've selected Eric, I have Virginia selected, and now I'm going to click Add to Selected Territory. And now I just get a pop-up because it recognizes that Virginia is already assigned to Will. So it's asking me, do you wish to reassign this area to Eric? So I'm going to select yes. And in this case, it's going to remove Virginia from Will, and it's going to add it to Eric's territory. And so now I see that change on the map, as well as the change in the values on my balancing graph. In addition, if there was a certain target I was trying to achieve, I could enter that target here underneath this Enter Balance Target. So I'm going to enter 1.7 million in this case. And when I hit enter, it just puts a measuring line on my graph to indicate where the different territories are in relation to my target. Now, another option I have as well is if I had some areas and I was going to create a new territory that I'm going to assign to a new manager. So in this case, I'm going to click my select areas again, and let's say I'm going to select, in this case I'm going to select multiple areas. I'm going to click and drag to intersect and select Tennessee and Alabama at once. So I see that it highlighted on the map, and now I'm simply going to click on this new territory button, and now I just give the name for the person I'm going to assign these territories to. So I want to, let's say I have a new manager that's coming in named John, and I click OK. And I now see that it created this new territory, and now John appears as well on my balancing graph. Also, let's say right now I'm looking at sales data, but let's say I want it to look at the territories by population. So I just simply come underneath select balancing field and select total population. And now I see my graph has been updated based upon population. So now I see that Will has almost 77 million, Eric's at almost 54 million, and then John is here at just over 11 million. Now once I had finished, let's say if I had gone through and I'm happy with my territory assignments, if I needed to export this out to a new Excel spreadsheet or a CSV file or even a DBase table, I can simply click on this Export Territories button. When I do, again, I get a File Save As dialog where I can, again, navigate to the folder where I want to save my new file to, and I simply give it a file name. So I'll just call this New Assignments. If I don't specify a file extension, by default, it's going to create an Excel spreadsheet file, or I could specify a CSV file extension for a CSV file, or a DBF file extension for a DBase table. So I'll just click Save, and it has now exported out my new territory assignments to a new spreadsheet. So that pretty much demonstrates the functionality. Well, one other thing I'll show real quick also. As I mentioned, you know, the plug-in is what's creating and managing your territories, but you also have the full functionality of the Simple GIS client application as well. And so what I mean, so I have my territory assignment shapefile added. Let's say I wanted to label these territories on the map. I could easily do that as that's native functionality in Simple GIS Client. I could simply double-click on this shapefile. And again, on the layer properties, this time I locate the Label Definition tab. And then I'm going to select the fields that I want to label. So let's say I want to label the manager. So I select Manager, and I click this button with the double arrows pointing to the right. As I hover over it, it says Add New Label Line, which adds it. And let's say if I wanted a multi-line label, so what I'm going to do is I also want to label my sales data, but instead of just showing as a number, I want to add some description to it so I know that that's sales data that I'm looking at. So I'm going to add some freeform text to my label. So I'm going to come here to my freeform text entry box, and I'm going to type, in this case, sales, or I'll just put sales with a colon on it. And then I'm going to use this double arrow button again to add it as a second line to my label. And now I'm going to actually append the sales data behind this freeform text. So I'm going to select this line. I'm going to select my sales field that has the numeric data. And now I'm going to click this plus button to append the value from this field to the end of this text, like so. And then I'm also going to change my font symbol to use something that will stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to double click on this font symbol. And in the palette, symbol palette that comes up, I'll scroll down till I find a symbol that may stand out a little more. So I'm going to select this this outlined font symbol here and click Apply. And now I see that it labeled my territories. So here's John, sales of $242,000. Here's Eric with sales of $1.5 million, and Will with sales of $1.9. I can zoom in to make that a little bit clearer. So that pretty much concludes the demonstration. Hope it's been useful. If you'd like more information, please visit the website. It's available at www.simplegissoftware.com. Thank you. Have a good day.